The frozen air cut through Willa Langford's lungs like shattered glass as she stumbled through the endless white expanse, her steps growing weaker with each passing hour. She had left the wagon train 3 days ago, following what she thought was the sound of rescue, only to realize too late that she had wandered in circles, the blizzard erasing every landmark, every hope of finding her way back. Now, as the fourth dawn broke somewhere beyond the suffocating curtain of snow, she barely had the strength to lift her frozen feet, her mind playing tricks on her, showing her mother's face in the swirling white, her father's voice calling from distances that didn't exist. Willa didn't know she had fallen until her cheek pressed against the ice, the cold somehow feeling warm now, which terrified some distant part of her consciousness that still understood what that meant. She was 22 years old, and she was going to die alone in the Sierra Nevada mountains in the winter of 1879, far from the Missouri farm where she'd grown up, far from everything she'd known. The wagon train had been heading to Sacramento, filled with families seeking new lives in California, but an early November storm had separated her from the others when she'd gone searching for a missing child who turned out to have been safe in another wagon all along. She closed her eyes just for a moment, just to rest. The voice that pulled her back sounded like it came from another world entirely. "Hey now, you can't sleep here. Come on, I've got you." Strong arms lifted her, and Willa tried to open her eyes, but her lashes were frozen together. She felt herself pressed against warmth, against the solid chest of someone who smelled like leather and wood smoke and horses. She wanted to speak, to thank whoever this was, but her jaw wouldn't work properly. "You're safe now," the voice said, deep and certain. "You're home." The words didn't make sense. She had no home here, but she clung to them anyway as consciousness slipped away. When Willa woke, she was surrounded by golden lamplight and the crackling of a fire. Her body ached everywhere, a deep throbbing pain that told her she was still alive, that her blood was flowing again through frozen extremities. She lay under a mountain of quilts and furs, in a bed that wasn't hers, in a room built from rough-hewn logs. "Easy there." That same voice from the snow. "Don't try to move too quickly. You've been out for near about 18 hours. Willa turned her head slowly, her neck stiff, and saw him for the first time. He sat in a wooden chair near the fire, a large man with broad shoulders and sun-weathered skin, dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and eyes the color of summer sky in a face that looked to be somewhere in his late 20s. He had a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of dark stubble, and his hands, resting on his knees, were broad and capable, the hands of a man who worked hard for his living. "Where am I?" Willa's voice came out as barely more than a rasp. "My cabin, about 15 miles south of Truckee." "Name's Flynn Edwards. I was checking my trap lines when I found you." He stood and moved closer, and she noticed he walked with a slight limp, favoring his left leg. "What's your name?" "Willa Langford." She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as the room spun. "Whoa, hold on now." Flynn was at her side in an instant, his hand gentle but firm on her shoulder, easing her back down. "You need to take it slow. You lost 3 toes on your left foot to frostbite. Doc Henderson came out from Truckee yesterday to tend to you. He said you're lucky that's all you lost." The words took a moment to penetrate. 3 toes. Willa looked down at the mound of blankets covering her feet, and something inside her cracked. She had survived, but she would never be whole again. "Hey." Flynn's voice was soft now. "Look at me, Willa." She met his eyes, surprised to find genuine concern there, not pity. "You're alive," he said simply. "That's what matters. The rest, we'll figure it out." She didn't mean to sound sharp, but the word came out that way regardless. "You don't know me. I'm a stranger you pulled out of the snow." "Maybe so," Flynn agreed, standing and moving to the fire where a pot hung on an iron hook. "But you're a stranger in my cabin now, in my bed, and that makes you my responsibility until you're well enough to decide what comes next." He ladled something into a tin cup and brought it to her. "Broth. Deer meat, vegetables, salt. You need to get your strength back." Willa wanted to argue to maintain some dignity, but the smell of the broth made her stomach clench with sudden, desperate hunger. She took the cup with shaking hands, and when Flynn saw she could barely hold it, he sat on the edge of the bed and helped guide it to her lips without a word, without making her feel more helpless than she already did. The broth was the best thing she'd ever tasted. "The wagon train," she said between sips. "Did they make it through?" There was a family, the Mitchells, with 4 children, and the Crawfords, the husband had a bad cough. "Did you hear anything?" Flynn nodded slowly. "Word came through that a train made it to Sacramento about a week ago. Lost 2 wagons in a river crossing, but everyone survived. That might be your people." Relief flooded through her so powerfully she started to cry, silent tears sliding down her cheeks. They had made it. She wasn't responsible for anyone's death. She was alone, but they were safe. Flynn took the cup from her hands and set it aside, then did something unexpected. He pulled a bandana from his pocket and gently wiped her tears, his touch careful as if she might break. "It's all right," he said quietly. "You've been through hell. You're allowed to fall apart a little." "I don't fall apart," Willa said automatically, the words her father had drilled into her since childhood. "Everyone falls apart sometimes," Flynn replied. "The strong ones just know how to put themselves back together afterward." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something in his eyes that spoke of his own hard-won understanding. This wasn't a man who spoke from imagination. He knew what it meant to break and rebuild. "Thank you," she whispered, "for finding me, for bringing me here. Like I said out in that snow, you're home now, at least until spring comes and the pass is clear." He stood and moved back toward the fire. "Doctor says you'll need at least 6 weeks before you can put real weight on that foot, and even then you'll need to be careful. The cold could come back, get into those wounds. So you're stuck with me for a while, Willa Langford." The way he said her name sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. She told herself it was just gratitude, just the natural response of someone who'd been saved. But as she watched him move around the cabin, stirring the fire, checking the windows where snow still piled against the glass, she couldn't help noticing the way his shoulders filled his worn flannel shirt, the way his hands moved with confident efficiency, the way his profile looked in the firelight. She was in trouble, she realized. A different kind of trouble than freezing to death, but trouble nonetheless. Over the following days, Willa learned the rhythms of Flynn's life. He rose before dawn, built up the fire, made coffee so strong it could wake the dead, and checked his trap lines before the sun was fully up. He returned by mid-morning, usually with game for dinner, sometimes with firewood, always with stories that made her laugh despite herself. He was surprisingly easy to talk to, this solitary mountain man, with a dry sense of humor and an unexpected gentleness. He had fashioned a crutch for her from a sturdy branch, padded with strips of leather, and slowly she began to move around the cabin, at first just to sit by the fire, then to help with small tasks. Flynn initially protested, insisting she should rest, but Willa couldn't stand being useless. "I need to do something," she told him on the 5th day, when he found her attempting to peel potatoes one-handed while leaning on the crutch. "I'll go mad just lying in that bed." Flynn studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but you let me know if the pain gets too bad. Deal?" Deal. They fell into an easy partnership. Willa took over the cooking, which freed Flynn to handle the heavier outdoor work. She mended his clothes, which had accumulated significant damage from his rough life in the mountains. He brought her books from a shelf she hadn't noticed before, surprising volumes of poetry and adventure stories, and even a play by Shakespeare. "You read." She hadn't meant it to sound so surprised. Flynn gave her a look that might have been amusement. "My mother was a schoolteacher in Virginia before the war. She made sure all her children could read and write and do proper sums. Just because I chose to live up in these mountains doesn't mean I'm ignorant." "I didn't mean it that way," Willa said quickly, embarrassed. "It's just, most men I've known didn't have much use for books." "Most men you've known were probably fools then," Flynn replied, settling into his chair by the fire with a book of his own. "Not much else to do up here during the long winter nights except read. And you like being alone." The question was out before she could stop it. Flynn was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the pages of his book but not reading. "I like the quiet," he said finally. "After the war, after everything that happened there, I needed space. Needed to hear myself think without the noise of cities and crowds. Been up here 7 years now. You fought in the war." Willa did the math quickly. He would have been young, maybe 18 or 19 when it ended. Last 2 years of it. Virginia infantry. Saw more death than any person should see in a lifetime. His jaw tightened. "That's where I got this." He tapped his bad leg. "Minier ball through the thigh at Petersburg. Field surgeon wanted to take the whole leg, but my sergeant stopped him. Said I was too stubborn to die or live as a cripple. Turned out he was right about the stubborn part anyway." "I'm sorry," Willa said softly. Flynn shook his head. "Don't be. I survived. Lot of good men didn't. Now I live up here, trap furs, hunt game, sell what I can in Truckee or Sacramento when the mood strikes. It's a simple life, but it's mine. Or it was, until I found a half-frozen woman wandering through my territory." There was no accusation in his tone, but Willa felt compelled to explain. "I was with a wagon train heading to Sacramento. My aunt lives there, or she did last I heard. My parents both died last year, diphtheria, and there was nothing left for me in Missouri except their debts and a farm I couldn't run alone. My aunt wrote saying she'd take me in, help me start fresh. So I sold everything, paid what I could of the debts, and joined up with a train heading west." "And then you got lost in the storm," Flynn finished. "There was a child missing, or we thought she was missing. I went looking for her, thought I saw her near the tree line. By the time I realized she was safe in another wagon, the storm had gotten worse and I couldn't find my way back. I tried to follow my own tracks, but the snow was covering them as fast as I made them. I just kept walking, thinking I'd eventually find something, someone." She paused, remembering the terror of that endless white. "I really thought I was going to die out there." "But you didn't," Flynn said, his blue eyes steady on hers. "You kept walking. That takes real courage, Willa, or real stupidity," she replied, trying to make light of it. "No," Flynn said firmly. "Stupidity would have been lying down in that snow and giving up. You fought. That's courage, plain and simple." Something warm unfurled in Willa's chest at his words, at the certainty in his voice. When was the last time someone had looked at her like that, like she was strong rather than something to be protected or pitied? As the days turned into weeks, the space between them seemed to shrink, filled with shared meals and comfortable silences and conversations that ranged from the profound to the ridiculous. Flynn taught her about the mountains, about reading the weather and tracking game, and which plants would kill you and which would save your life. Willa told him about Missouri, about growing up on a farm with parents who loved each other fiercely, about the ache of losing them both within 3 months of each other. "Mama went first," she said one evening, both of them sitting by the fire after dinner, the wind howling outside. "Papa tried so hard to keep going, but I think something in him broke when she died. He lasted another 3 months, just long enough to see spring one more time. Doctors said it was pneumonia, but I think it was really a broken heart. My parents were like that too, Flynn said quietly. Lost my father to the fever when I was 15. Mama followed 6 months later. Everyone said it was the same fever, but I knew better. She just didn't want to live without him. They sat in silence for a moment, bound by the understanding of those who'd loved and lost. Is that why you never married? Willa asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. I'm sorry, that's none of my business. It's all right, Flynn said. Truth is, I never found anyone who made me want to try. Seemed like most women wanted a man who'd give them a house in town, stability, social standing. I couldn't be that man. Didn't want to be. So I figured it was better to be alone than to disappoint someone. That's sad, Willa said before she could stop herself. Flynn looked at her, something unreadable in his expression. Maybe. Or maybe I was just waiting to find someone who could understand why the mountains call to me, why I need this space and quiet. Someone who wouldn't try to change me into something I'm not. The air between them felt suddenly charged, and Willa found she couldn't look away from his eyes. Her heart was beating too fast, and she knew, absolutely knew, that something was shifting between them, something that would change everything. Flynn cleared his throat and stood abruptly. I should check on the horses. In the middle of the night, storm might spook them. He grabbed his coat and was out the door before she could respond, letting in a blast of cold air. Willa sat alone by the fire, her hand pressed against her racing heart. This was foolish. She barely knew this man. She was supposed to be heading to Sacramento to her aunt, to some semblance of the life she'd planned. But plans changed. People changed. And sitting in this small cabin, listening to the wind howl and waiting for Flynn to return, Willa realized she was changing too. When Flynn came back 20 minutes later, snow dusting his shoulders and hair, he found her still sitting by the fire. Horses are fine, he said, unnecessarily. I figured. He hung his coat and stood awkwardly by the door, this man who was never awkward. Willa, I don't, she interrupted, not sure she could handle whatever he was about to say. It's late, we should probably sleep. He nodded slowly. Yeah, probably should, but neither of them moved. They stood there, fire between them, snow howling outside and everything unsaid hanging heavy in the air. Finally, Flynn spoke. When I found you out in that snow and I said you were home, I didn't know why I said it. The words just came out. But I've been thinking about it, and I wonder if maybe some part of me recognized something. Recognized you. Willa's breath caught. Flynn. I know it's crazy, he continued, his voice low and rough. I know you've got a life waiting for you in Sacramento, an aunt expecting you, plans for your future. And I'm just a mountain man with a bad leg and a cabin that barely keeps out the wind. But I need you to know that these weeks with you here have been the best weeks I've had in years. Maybe ever. She was moving before she fully realized it, crossing the space between them despite her injured foot, despite the crutch that clattered to the floor when she dropped it. Flynn caught her as she stumbled, his arms strong around her, and she looked up into his face. When I was dying out there in the snow, she said, her voice shaking, all I could think about was everything I'd never done, everyone I'd never been. And then you found me and you said I was home, and even though it made no sense, even though I'd never seen you before in my life, something in me believed you, something in me knew. Willa, he breathed her name like a prayer. Kiss me, she whispered. Please, Flynn, just kiss me. He did. His lips met hers with a gentleness that belied his size, a tenderness that made her knees weak. His hand came up to cup her face, calloused and warm, and she melted into him, into this moment that felt both completely unexpected and utterly inevitable. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Flynn pressed his forehead to hers. You should know, he said quietly. If we go down this road, I'm not a man who does things halfway. I don't know how to love casual. I only know how to love with everything I have." "Good," Willa replied, her hands fisted in his shirt. "Because I don't want halfway. I want everything." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and she tasted promise and future and hope. When he lifted her, careful of her injured foot, and carried her to the bed, she didn't protest. When he laid her down and stretched out beside her, both of them still fully clothed, she curled into his warmth and felt safer than she had since her parents died. "We'll take this slow," Flynn murmured against her hair. "I want to do right by you, Willa Langford." "We have all winter," she replied, already drifting toward sleep, exhausted by emotion and the lingering effects of her ordeal. "We have longer than that if you want it," Flynn said, so quietly she almost didn't hear. "We have as long as you'll stay." She fell asleep smiling, wrapped in his arms, the storm raging outside but unable to touch the warmth they'd created together. The next weeks passed in a haze of discovery. Flynn was true to his word about taking things slow, treating Willa with a respect and care that made her love him more every day. Because it was love, she realized. Impossibly fast, completely impractical but absolutely real. They talked for hours, learning each other's stories, dreams, fears. Flynn spoke of his younger sister, married to a rancher near Sacramento, whom he visited twice a year. Willa told him about the books she'd loved as a child, the way she'd always felt confined by the expectations of small-town Missouri, the secret relief she'd felt at the chance to start over somewhere new. "I felt guilty about it," she admitted one afternoon as they sat together cleaning Flynn's rifles. "My parents had just died, and part of me was sad, but part of me was also excited about the possibility of a different life. What kind of daughter thinks like that?" "The kind who's honest," Flynn replied. "Love and obligation aren't the same thing, Willa. You can love your parents and still want your own life. They would have understood that." Would they? She wasn't sure. If they were worth anything, they would, Flynn said firmly. "My mother told me the week before she died that she wanted me to live, really live, not just exist. She said she'd haunt me from beyond the grave if I spent my life being miserable out of some sense of duty to her memory. So when I came up to these mountains and everyone said I was running away, maybe they were right. But I was also running toward something, toward the life I needed to live. There's no shame in that." Willa set down the rifle she'd been cleaning and leaned over to kiss him, soft and sweet. "How did you get so wise?" "I'm not wise," Flynn said, pulling her closer. "I'm just a man who spent a lot of time alone with his thoughts. Turns out when you can't run from yourself, you have to face some hard truths." As Christmas approached, Flynn cut down a small pine tree and set it up in the corner of the cabin. Willa fashioned decorations from scraps of fabric and carved wood, and they strung popcorn by the fire while Flynn told stories of Christmases past. On Christmas Eve, Flynn disappeared into the storage area of the cabin and returned with a wrapped package. "I made this for you," he said, almost shy. "Started it a few weeks back." Willa unwrapped the paper carefully and found a pair of beautiful leather boots, sized to fit her smaller foot and the bandaged one, with extra support built in where she'd lost her toes. "Flynn," she breathed, running her fingers over the intricate stitching. "These are beautiful." "Try them on," he urged. The boots fit perfectly, and more importantly, they let her walk without the crutch for the first time since the frostbite. Willa took a few experimental steps, joy flooding through her at the freedom of movement. "They're perfect," she said, tears in her eyes. "Thank you." "I have something else," Flynn said, and this time she heard real nervousness in his voice. He pulled a small wooden box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a ring, simple gold with a small stone that caught the firelight. "This was my mother's," he said quietly. The only thing of value she owned. She gave it to me before she died and told me to give it to a woman worth having. I never found that woman until you walked into my life, half frozen and stubborn as hell." He took a breath. "Willa Langford, I know we haven't known each other long by most people's standards, but I know my heart, and I know it belongs to you. Will you marry me? Will you stay here and build a life with me in these mountains?" Willa felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it. Yes to you, Flynn Edwards." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit as if it had been made for her. Then he was kissing her, and she was kissing him back, and the cabin that had been his alone was now theirs together. They made the trip down to Truckee 3 days later, through snow that was finally starting to melt under the winter sun. Flynn introduced Willa to Pastor Morrison, a weathered man who'd been ministering to the mountain communities for 30 years. "Another soul brave enough to love a mountain man," the pastor said with a smile. "Or crazy enough, depending on how you look at it." "Definitely crazy," Willa agreed cheerfully, squeezing Flynn's hand. They were married in the small church on December 28, 1879, with the pastor's wife and a rancher from a nearby spread as witnesses. Willa wore a simple blue dress that Flynn had purchased from the general store, and Flynn wore his cleanest shirt and a nervous expression that made her love him even more. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Flynn kissed her with such tenderness that Mrs. Morrison dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. That night, back in the cabin that was now truly their home, Flynn carried Willa over the threshold despite her laughing protests that her foot was healed enough to walk. "It's tradition," he insisted. "And I intend to start our marriage out properly." He set her down gently by the fire, and for a moment they just looked at each other, husband and wife, the weight of those words settling over them like a blessing. "I love you," Willa said, reaching up to touch his face. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "Don't be scared," Flynn replied, pulling her close. "I've got you. Always." They made love for the first time that night, learning each other's bodies with patience and passion, creating something sacred in the flickering firelight. Afterward, as they lay tangled together under the quilts, Willa felt a peace she'd never known before. This was where she belonged. Not in Sacramento with an aunt she barely remembered. Not in Missouri on a farm full of ghosts, but here, in this mountain cabin, with this man who'd found her in the snow and given her a home. Winter deepened, and then slowly, gradually, began to loosen its grip. Snow melted in earnest, revealing brown earth and the first hints of green. Flynn took Willa around his territory, showing her the trap lines, the best hunting spots, the hidden meadows where wildflowers would bloom come summer. "It's beautiful," Willa said, standing in one such meadow, the mountains rising all around them. "I never imagined anything could be this beautiful." "I hoped you'd think so," Flynn said, coming to stand behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist. "I hoped you'd love it the way I do." "I love it because you love it," Willa replied honestly, "but also because it feels like freedom, like we can be anyone, do anything up here." "Within reason," Flynn said with a chuckle. "We still need to eat and keep warm and not get killed by bears." "Obviously," Willa said, laughing. "But you know what I mean. There's no one here to tell us how to live, what to be. We can just be ourselves." As spring progressed, they established new rhythms. Flynn taught Willa to shoot, to trap, to read the forest signs. She proved to be a natural shot, something that surprised them both. "My father used to take me hunting," she explained after hitting 3 targets in a row. "He always wanted a son, but he got me instead, so he figured he'd teach me everything he would have taught a boy. Mama hated it, said it wasn't ladylike, but Papa said survival mattered more than propriety." "Your father was a smart man," Flynn said. pride evident in his voice. They made trips to Truckee for supplies, and each time Flynn introduced Willa as his wife with such obvious happiness that she couldn't help but glow. The townspeople quickly accepted her, charmed by her straightforward manner and the way she could hold her own in conversations about hunting and trapping. In late April, Flynn's sister Fiona arrived for her annual visit, traveling with her rancher husband Marcus and their 3 children. Fiona was a force of nature, tall and dark-haired like Flynn, with the same blue eyes and stubborn chin. "So you're the woman who finally caught my brother," she said, looking Willa up and down with undisguised curiosity. "More like he caught me," Willa replied. "Literally pulled me out of a snowdrift." Fiona laughed, a big sound that filled the cabin. "That sounds like Flynn, always rescuing strays. He used to bring home injured animals when we were kids. Mama said he had too soft a heart for his own good." "I was going to let you sleep in the barn," Flynn told his sister with mock severity. "You don't have a barn," Fiona pointed out. "I'd build one just to put you in it." The siblings' affection for each other was obvious, and Willa felt a pang of longing for the family she'd lost. But watching Flynn with his nieces and nephew, seeing the gentleness he showed the children, the patience he had for their endless questions, she felt something else too. Hope. The possibility of her own family, children who would grow up in these mountains, strong and free. That night, after everyone had settled down to sleep, Flynn and Willa lay together in their bed, voices low. "You're good with children," Willa ventured. "They're easier than adults," Flynn replied. "More honest about what they want. Do you want them? Children of our own?" Flynn rolled to face her, his expression serious. "Yes, but only if you do. I know childbirth is dangerous, especially up here so far from doctors. I won't pressure you into something that could hurt you." Willa's heart swelled at his concern. "I want them," she said simply. "I want to fill this cabin with noise and life. I want to give you sons and daughters who have your eyes and your kindness. And your courage," Flynn added, kissing her softly. "And your strength." "Then we'll have a family," Willa said, and it felt like a promise, a prayer, a gift all at once. Fiona and her family stayed for a week, and by the time they left, Willa felt like she'd gained not just a sister-in-law but a true friend. Fiona made her promise to visit the ranch in Sacramento, and Willa agreed, already thinking about the trip down the mountain when summer fully arrived. June brought warmth and wildflowers, and the discovery that Willa was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks but waited until she was certain before telling Flynn. She chose an evening when they'd taken dinner outside, sitting on the crude porch Flynn had built, watching the sun set over the mountains. "I have something to tell you," she said, trying to keep the smile off her face. Flynn looked at her, immediate concern crossing his features. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right, actually." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby, Flynn. Come winter, we'll be 3 instead of 2. For a moment, Flynn just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then his face broke into the biggest smile she'd ever seen, and he let out a whoop of joy that probably scared every animal within a mile. "A baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We're going to have a baby." "You're happy?" Willa asked, though she could clearly see he was. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Flynn replied, pulling her into his arms. "Willa, you've given me everything. A home, a purpose, love, and now a child. I never thought I'd have any of this." "Neither did I," Willa admitted. "But here we are." "Here we are," Flynn echoed, kissing her with such love and joy that she felt it down to her bones. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer months. Flynn became impossibly protective, trying to prevent Willa from doing any heavy work, but she refused to be coddled. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she told him firmly after he tried to stop her from weeding the garden she'd planted. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time while still living their lives. I can handle pulling a few weeds. I know, I just worry, Flynn admitted. Worry less, trust me more, Willa advised, standing up and kissing his cheek. I'll tell you if something feels wrong. I promise. They made the trip to Sacramento in July, staying with Fiona and Marcus for 2 weeks. Willa met with a doctor who confirmed everything was progressing normally and gave her advice for the coming months. She also, finally, visited her aunt, a meeting that turned out to be bittersweet. Aunt Margaret was a thin, nervous woman who seemed overwhelmed by the idea of the niece she'd offered to take in. When Willa explained that she'd married and wouldn't need to impose after all, the relief on her aunt's face was palpable. I'm glad you found someone, Margaret said, though her tone suggested she was more glad to be released from the obligation. Your mother always said you were the independent sort. Walking away from her aunt's small house, Willa felt Flynn's hand find hers. That must have been hard, he said quietly. Not as hard as I expected, Willa admitted. I think I already knew she didn't really want me there. She offered out of duty, not love. And now I don't have to feel guilty about not going through with it. Everything worked out the way it was supposed to, Flynn said. Yes, Willa agreed, looking up at him. It really did. They returned to the mountains at the end of July, and Willa threw herself into preparing for winter and the baby both. She sewed tiny clothes from scraps of fabric, made blankets, organized the cabin to accommodate a cradle that Flynn built with his own hands. My father made my cradle, he said, sanding the wood smooth. And his father made his. It's a family tradition, I guess. Sons making beds for their children. You don't know if it's a son, Willa pointed out. Son, daughter, doesn't matter, Flynn replied. Either way, they'll sleep in something I made with love. Autumn painted the mountains in gold and red, and Willa's belly grew round with their child. Dr. Henderson came up from Truckee in October to check on her, pronouncing both mother and baby healthy. I'll plan to be here when the time comes, he said. Send word to town when her pains start, and I'll ride up fast as I can. What if the weather's bad? Flynn asked, worry evident in his voice. Then I've trained you on what to do, the doctor replied calmly. First babies usually take their time anyway. Odds are I'll make it. But if I don't, you're capable of handling this, Edwards. After the doctor left, Flynn was uncharacteristically quiet. Talk to me, Willa urged that night as they lay in bed. I'm scared, Flynn admitted. I've faced down enemy soldiers and angry bears and survived a leg wound that should have killed me, but the thought of something happening to you terrifies me. I can't lose you, Willa. I can't. She took his face in her hands, making him look at her. You won't lose me. I'm strong, remember? You said so yourself. I survived 4 days in a blizzard. I can survive childbirth. Promise me, Flynn said, his voice breaking. I promise, Willa said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. I'm not going anywhere. You're stuck with me, Flynn Edwards. The first snow fell in early November, and Willa's labor pains began 2 weeks later, on a cold, clear morning when the sky was so blue it hurt to look at. It's time, she told Flynn, who immediately went pale. Time, now, should I get the doctor? Should I boil water? What do I do? Despite the growing pain, Willa laughed. First, breathe. Second, yes, send word to Dr. Henderson. Third, help me walk. Movement is supposed to help. Flynn sent a rider to Truckee and then stayed by Willa's side as the hours passed. The contractions grew stronger, closer together, and still the doctor didn't come. Evening fell, then full night, and Willa knew they were on their own. I can do this, she panted between contractions. We can do this. That's right, Flynn said, his voice steadier now that it was clear he had no choice but to be strong. We can do this. "I've got you, Willa, I've got you." Their son was born just after midnight, sliding into his father's waiting hands with a lusty cry that filled the cabin. Flynn cut the cord with shaking hands, wrapped the baby in a clean blanket and placed him in Willa's arms, tears streaming down his face. "You did it," he whispered, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You're amazing. He's amazing. We have a son, Willa." Willa looked down at the tiny red face, the dark hair, the impossibly small fingers that gripped her thumb with surprising strength, and felt her heart expand in a way she'd never imagined possible. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to your home." Dr. Henderson arrived at dawn, riding through the new snow, and found mother and baby both healthy, Flynn exhausted but elated. "I see you managed just fine without me," the doctor said with a smile. "Barely," Flynn admitted, "but we made it." They named their son Frederick William Edwards, after both their fathers, and called him Freddie. He was a good baby, alert and curious, with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined chin. The winter passed in a blur of feedings and diaper changes and stolen moments of sleep. Flynn proved to be a natural father, walking the floor with Freddie when he cried, singing old ballads his mother had taught him, talking to his son about everything and nothing. "I want him to know my voice," Flynn explained when Willa teased him about having one-sided conversations with an infant. "I want him to always know he's loved and wanted." Watching them together, man and baby, Willa felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. This was what happiness looked like. This was what home felt like. Spring came again and Freddie grew sturdy and strong. Fiona visited in May, bringing toys and clothes and an endless stream of advice that made Flynn roll his eyes, but Willa found helpful. "You're doing a wonderful job," Fiona told Willa one afternoon as they watched Flynn and Marcus take Freddie on a walk around the property. "I wasn't sure about you at first, I'll admit. Thought you might be some city girl who wouldn't last a season up here, but you've proved me wrong." "I love it here," Willa said simply. "I love the mountains, the quiet, the freedom. And I love your brother more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." "He loves you just as much," Fiona replied. "I've never seen him this happy. You're good for him, Willa. You make him whole." The years that followed were full and rich. Freddie grew from baby to toddler to boy, running wild through the mountains, learning to track and hunt and read the forest from his father. Willa gave birth to a daughter, Grace, when Freddie was 3, and then another son, Daniel, 2 years after that. The cabin expanded to accommodate their growing family, with Flynn adding on rooms whenever another baby was on the way. They were crowded but happy, the children bringing noise and life and endless joy. Willa took over more of the business side of things, negotiating prices in Truckee for Flynn's furs and arranging trades with other mountain families. She proved to have a head for numbers and a gift for making deals that benefited everyone involved. "You should have been running a business empire," Flynn told her one evening after she'd successfully negotiated a contract to supply furs to a company in San Francisco. "I'm running something better," Willa replied, looking around at their children playing by the fire. "I'm running a life." They had hard times too, of course. A winter when Flynn broke his arm and couldn't trap for months, forcing them to live on their carefully hoarded savings. A spring when Grace came down with scarlet fever and they thought they might lose her, but she pulled through thanks to Dr. Henderson's care and her own fierce will to live. A summer when fire threatened the mountain and they had to evacuate to Truckee for 3 weeks until the danger passed. But they weathered every storm together, their love and partnership deepening with each challenge overcome. The children grew, strong and healthy and happy, knowing they were loved beyond measure. One evening in the spring of 1891, 12 years after Flynn had found Willa in the snow, they sat together on the porch they'd expanded to wrap around the whole cabin. The children were inside, supposedly sleeping but probably still whispering and giggling in their beds. The mountains stretched out before them, purple in the fading light, snow still clinging to the highest peaks. "You ever regret it?" Flynn asked suddenly. "Staying here instead of going to Sacramento, you could have had an easier life there." Willa looked at him, surprised. "Easier how?" "I don't know. Running water, neighbors, society. All the things women are supposed to want." "Flynn Edwards, are you having some kind of crisis?" Willa teased. "I'm serious," Flynn said, taking her hand. "Sometimes I worry that I kept you from something better." "There is nothing better than this," Willa said firmly. "Nothing better than you, than our children, than this life we've built. Yes, it's hard sometimes. Yes, there are days when I'd kill for a hot bath that I didn't have to haul water for. But I have never, not for one single moment, regretted choosing you, choosing this." Flynn was quiet for a moment, his thumb rubbing circles on the back of her hand. "When I found you in that snow and I said you were home, I think I was really saying that I'd been waiting for you. That I'd been incomplete without even knowing it, and suddenly there you were, the missing piece I didn't know I needed." "You saved my life that day," Willa said softly. "No," Flynn replied. "We saved each other." Willa leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the stars begin to emerge in the darkening sky. "Do you remember how scared we both were? How impossible it all seemed?" "I remember thinking I'd never felt anything so right in my life," Flynn said. "Scared, yes, but also certain. Some things you just know, right down to your bones." "I knew too," Willa admitted. "From the moment I woke up and saw you sitting by the fire, I knew my life had just changed completely." They sat in comfortable silence, the sounds of the mountain evening surrounding them. An owl hooted somewhere in the distance. A breeze rustled through the pines. Inside, one of the children laughed at something. "We should probably check on them," Willa said, making no move to get up. "In a minute," Flynn replied. "I want to sit here with my wife for a few more minutes, remembering how lucky I am." "We're both lucky," Willa corrected. "Yes," Flynn agreed, pulling her closer. "We are." The years continued to pass, bringing more changes, more challenges, more joys. Freddie grew into a young man who looked so much like Flynn it was startling, with the same broad shoulders and blue eyes and quiet strength. He announced at 18 that he wanted to stay in the mountains, to build his own cabin nearby and start his own trap lines. "Are you sure?" Flynn asked. "There's a whole world out there beyond these mountains." "I've seen the world," Freddie replied. "Or enough of it anyway. This is where I belong, just like you." Grace proved to have inherited her mother's head for business and her father's love of the mountains in equal measure. At 16, she announced she wanted to go to Sacramento for schooling, then come back and start a trading company that would bring mountain goods to city markets. "You're going to be a millionaire," Willa told her daughter with pride. "No," Grace replied with a grin that was pure Willa. "We're all going to be millionaires. This is a family business." Daniel, quieter than his siblings, turned out to have a gift with words. He filled notebooks with stories and poems, observations about mountain life and the people who lived it. When he was 15, one of his essays was published in a Sacramento newspaper, and letters started arriving from an editor who wanted more. "Our son, the writer," Flynn said, shaking his head in amazement. "He gets it from you," Willa pointed out. "All those books you read, all those stories you told. He learned to love words from watching you." By the winter of 1899, 20 years after Flynn had found Willa in the snow, they were grandparents twice over. Freddie had married a girl from Truckee, and they had 2 daughters who loved visiting their grandparents' cabin. Grace was engaged to a businessman from Sacramento, who had the good sense to recognize her worth and the wisdom to let her run her own affairs. Daniel was at university in San Francisco, his stories gaining him recognition and acclaim. Flynn and Willa, now in their late 40s and early 50s respectively, had slowed down slightly but showed no signs of stopping. Flynn still ran trap lines, though shorter ones now. Willa still managed the business side of things, though Grace was taking over more and more. They still loved each other with the fierce devotion that had marked their relationship from the beginning. One evening in December, almost exactly 20 years to the day from their wedding, they sat by the fire in the cabin that had grown from a one-room shelter into a sprawling home. 20 years, Willa said, leaning against Flynn's shoulder. Where did the time go? Into raising children and building a life and loving you, Flynn replied. Best 20 years of my life. Mine too, Willa said. She looked at the ring on her finger, Flynn's mother's ring, worn smooth from 2 decades of wear. Do you ever think about that day in the snow? About how different things could have been if you'd checked your trap lines an hour later, or taken a different path? Sometimes, Flynn admitted. And then I thank God or fate or whatever power guided my steps that day that I went exactly where I needed to go, exactly when I needed to be there. I was so close to giving up, Willa said quietly. Another hour, maybe less, and I would have just laid down in that snow and never gotten up. And then I heard your voice, felt your arms, and everything changed. You're home, Flynn quoted, remembering the words he'd spoken without understanding why. I am home, Willa agreed. I have been ever since that moment. Home isn't a place, I learned. It's a person. It's you, Flynn. It's always been you. He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of 20 years of love and partnership and devotion. Outside, snow began to fall, the same snow that had nearly killed her and instead had brought them together. I love you, Flynn whispered against her lips. Today, tomorrow, and every day after that. I love you too, Willa replied, always and forever. The fire crackled in the hearth. The snow fell soft and steady outside. And in the cabin on the mountain, 2 people who had found each other against all odds sat wrapped in each other's arms, surrounded by the life they'd built together, the love they'd nurtured, and the home they'd created from nothing but hope and courage and an unshakable belief in each other. The years that followed brought more grandchildren, more expansion of the family business, more stories of success and struggle. Grace's trading company flourished, eventually expanding to 3 locations across California. Daniel's writing career took off, his novels about mountain life bringing national attention and critical acclaim. Freddie built not just a cabin but a small compound, as more families moved to the area, seeking the same freedom and peace that Flynn and Willa had found decades earlier. Through it all, Flynn and Willa remained the heart of their family, the foundation from which everything else grew. They were consulted on all major decisions, their home the gathering place for holidays and celebrations, their love story the example that their children and grandchildren aspired to match. In the summer of 1905, Willa took ill with pneumonia. For 3 terrible weeks, Flynn barely left her side, holding her hand through fevers and chills, reading to her during the hours when she was lucid enough to listen, praying to God to spare her during the times when he thought he might lose her. "Don't you dare leave me," he told her fiercely one night when her fever was at its peak. "We have a deal, remember? We're supposed to grow old together, sit on that porch and watch our great-grandchildren play in the meadow. You don't get to break that deal." Willa, delirious with fever, squeezed his hand weakly. "Not leaving," she managed. "Never leaving you." And she didn't. Slowly, painfully, she fought her way back to health. By autumn, she was up and moving again, though thinner and weaker than before. Flynn hovered like an anxious mother hen until Willa finally snapped at him to give her some space. "I survived," she told him firmly. "Stop treating me like I'm made of china." "You scared me," Flynn admitted, his voice rough. "I've faced a lot of things in my life, Willa, but the thought of losing you broke something in me." "Then it's a good thing you didn't lose me," Willa said, pulling him down for a kiss. "We're not done yet, you and I. We have years left to drive each other crazy." They did have years, precious years filled with laughter and love, and the deep satisfaction of lives well lived. They celebrated their 30th anniversary in 1909 with all their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren gathered at the cabin. Flynn gave a speech that made everyone cry, talking about the day he'd found a frozen woman in the snow and how she'd thawed his heart along with her frozen limbs. "I thought I knew what I wanted from life," he said, his arm around Willa's shoulders. "Thought I had it all figured out. And then this stubborn, beautiful woman came stumbling through my territory and showed me I didn't know anything at all. She taught me about real love, real partnership, real family. Everything good in my life came from the day I found her in that snow. And everything good in my life came from the day you said I was home," Willa added, wiping her eyes. "Because you were right, Flynn. I was home. I just didn't know it yet." The party went on late into the night, with music and dancing and stories told and retold until everyone knew them by heart. Young couples looked at Flynn and Willa and dreamed of having a love like theirs. Older couples looked and wondered where the years had gone. As the guests finally started to depart, grandchildren falling asleep in their parents' arms, Willa and Flynn stood on their porch watching everyone leave. "We did good, didn't we?" Willa asked. "We did better than good," Flynn replied. "We built something that's going to last long after we're gone." "Don't talk about that," Willa said, a sudden chill running through her. "Hey," Flynn turned her to face him. "We're not going anywhere anytime soon. I plan on annoying you for at least another 20 years. "Only 20, Willa teased. "Well, maybe 30 if you're really lucky." They both laughed, the sound carrying across the meadow into the mountains that had witnessed their entire love story. Time continued its relentless march. Flynn's bad leg, which had served him well for so many years despite the old wound, finally started to give him real trouble in his late 60s. He needed a cane to get around, and some days the pain was bad enough that he couldn't leave the cabin. But he never complained, just adjusted his routines, found new ways to be useful. Willa's frostbite-damaged foot also caused her increasing problems as she aged. Some winters, when the weather was particularly cold, the old injury ached fiercely. But like Flynn, she refused to let physical limitations define her. She just found different ways to contribute, to stay active, to live fully. On a clear morning in March 1912, Flynn and Willa took a walk together through the meadow behind their cabin. Spring was just beginning to assert itself, snow melting in patches to reveal the brown earth beneath. Flynn leaned on his cane, Willa on his arm, both moving slower than they once had but still moving. 33 years, Flynn said suddenly. 33 years since I found you out here." "Best 33 years of my life," Willa replied. "You know what I realized the other day?" Flynn asked. "I've now spent more of my life with you than without you. You're not just part of my story anymore. You are my story." "And you're mine," Willa said, stopping to look up at him. His hair was white now, his face lined by years of weather and laughter and life. But his eyes were still that same blue that had looked at her with such kindness all those years ago. "Everything that matters in my life, everything good and real and true, it all started the day you found me." "I like to think you found me too," Flynn said. "That we found each other when we both needed it most." "Maybe we did," Willa agreed. They stood together in that meadow, old now but not diminished, weathered but not broken. Behind them, the cabin they'd built together stood solid and strong. Around them, the mountains rose eternal, and between them, the love they'd forged through years of joy and hardship, triumph and loss, remained as unshakable as it had been that first winter. "Ready to head back?" Flynn asked. "In a minute," Willa said, leaning into him. "Let's just stand here a little longer. I want to remember this moment, this perfect moment." "Every moment with you is perfect," Flynn replied. "Flatterer," Willa said, but she was smiling. They stood together as the sun climbed higher in the sky, warming their faces, melting more of the snow. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called. The wind whispered through the pines. And two people who had found each other in a snowstorm 33 years earlier held each other close and knew that they had lived fully, loved deeply, and created something that would endure long after they were gone. The seasons turned. Flynn and Willa grew older, slower, but never stopped loving. They celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, welcomed new great-grandchildren, mourned the passing of old friends. They sat on their porch on summer evenings, walked slowly through the meadows in spring, kept warm by their fire in winter. In the spring of 1914, as the world outside their mountain sanctuary began to spiral toward a war that would reshape everything, Flynn fell ill. It started as a simple cough, but quickly became something more serious. Dr. Henderson, old himself now, made the trek up the mountain and diagnosed pneumonia. "His lungs aren't what they used to be," the doctor told Willa privately. "The war injury, years of breathing cold mountain air, age, it's all catching up. I'll do what I can, but you should prepare yourself." Willa refused to prepare herself for anything except Flynn's recovery. She nursed him with the same fierce determination she'd brought to everything else in her life, barely sleeping, constantly at his side. "You need to rest," Flynn told her during one of his lucid moments, his hand weak in hers. "I'll rest when you're better," Willa replied stubbornly. "Stubborn woman," Flynn said, but there was love in his voice. "You wouldn't have me any other way." "No," Flynn agreed, "I wouldn't." But despite Willa's best efforts, despite the prayers of their children and grandchildren, despite every remedy and treatment Dr. Henderson could provide, Flynn continued to decline. By early April, it was clear the end was near. The family gathered, filling the cabin to overflowing. Freddie and his wife, Grace and her husband, Daniel with his family, and so many grandchildren and great-grandchildren that they spilled out onto the porch and into the yard. They took turns sitting with Flynn, saying their goodbyes, thanking him for everything he'd given them. But the person who never left his side was Willa. She sat in a chair next to the bed, holding his hand, talking to him even when he couldn't respond, reminding him of their life together. "You remember the first time you kissed me?" she asked on what would prove to be his last evening. "You were so nervous, like you thought I might break. And then when you finally did it, you told me you only knew how to love with everything you had. You kept that promise, Flynn Edwards. You loved me with everything you had, every single day for 35 years. Flynn's eyes opened, surprisingly clear. "Willa," he whispered. "I'm here," she said, leaning closer. "I'm right here." "Best day of my life," Flynn said, his voice barely audible. "Finding you in that snow, best thing I ever did." "Best thing that ever happened to me was you saying I was home," Willa replied, tears streaming down her face. "You gave me a home, Flynn. You gave me everything." "Love you," Flynn breathed. "Always." "I love you too," Willa said. "Go if you need to. I'll be okay. The family will be okay. We'll take care of each other. But know that you were loved, Flynn. So deeply loved. And I'll carry that love with me until we're together again." Flynn squeezed her hand one last time, gave her the shadow of his beautiful smile, and closed his eyes. He died peacefully just after sunset, surrounded by family, holding the hand of the woman he'd loved for 35 years. The grief was crushing. Willa felt like part of her had been torn away, leaving a hole that could never be filled. But she was not alone in her sorrow. Her children grieved with her, supported her, reminded her that she still had reasons to keep going. They buried Flynn in the meadow where he'd proposed, under a pine tree he'd always loved. The whole community turned out for the funeral, testament to the respect and affection Flynn had earned over his years in the mountains. Person after person spoke of his kindness, his integrity, his devotion to family. When it was Willa's turn to speak, she stood at the grave and looked out at the mountains Flynn had loved so much. "My husband once told me that these mountains gave him space to hear himself think," she said, her voice steady despite the tears. "They gave him peace after the war, refuge from a world that was too loud and too cruel. And then they gave him me, delivered to his doorstep by a snowstorm, frozen and lost. Flynn always said it was fate that brought us together, that our story was written in the stars or in the snow or in something bigger than both of us. I don't know about that. What I do know is that Flynn Edwards was the best man I ever knew, and loving him was the greatest privilege of my life. He saved me in more ways than just pulling me out of that snow. He showed me what real love looked like, what home felt like, what it meant to build a life with someone. And now he's gone, but the life we built together remains. It lives on in our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. It lives on in every person he helped, every kindness he showed, every moment of joy he created. Flynn Edwards was a good man, and the world is poorer without him. But it's also richer for having had him in it, even for too short a time." She placed a hand on the wooden marker Freddie had carved, tracing Flynn's name with her fingers. "Rest well, my love. I'll see you again someday. Until then, I'll keep living the life we built together. I'll keep telling our story, and I'll keep loving you today, tomorrow, and every day after that." The months that followed were the hardest of Willa's life. She had lost her parents, survived a blizzard, endured childbirth and illness and countless hardships, but nothing had prepared her for the emptiness of life without Flynn. The cabin felt too big and too empty. The bed was cold. Every corner held memories that made her heart ache. But gradually, with the support of her family, Willa found a new rhythm. She couldn't replace Flynn, couldn't fill the space he'd left, but she could honor his memory by continuing to live fully. She helped Grace with the business, taught her great-grandchildren to read, worked in her garden and kept the cabin exactly as Flynn had left it. People told her she should move to town, be closer to family, not live alone in the mountains. But Willa refused. "This is my home," she said firmly. "Flynn and I built this home together. I'm not leaving it." And so she stayed, through that first terrible winter without him, through the spring that brought both renewal and fresh waves of grief, through summer and fall and into the next winter. She stayed through the years that followed, through America's entry into the Great War, through the Spanish flu pandemic that took so many lives but spared hers, through the Roaring '20s and the crash that followed. She stayed because this was where her story had happened, where her life had mattered, where love had transformed her from a lost woman in the snow into someone strong and whole and happy. On a December morning in 1929, 50 years to the day since she'd married Flynn Edwards, Willa woke early and made her way slowly to the meadow where he was buried. She was 72 years old now, her body bent with age, her steps slow and careful. But she made the walk because she made it every week, rain or shine, snow or sun. She sat on the bench that Freddie had built next to Flynn's grave and looked out at the mountains. 50 years, she said aloud. "Can you believe it, Flynn? 50 years since you made me your wife." 53 years since you found me in that snow and changed everything." The wind whispered through the pines, and Willa imagined it was Flynn answering. "The family's doing well," she continued, as she always did. "Grace's company is struggling with this depression everyone's talking about, but she's tough. She'll figure it out. Freddie's thinking about selling some of the land to the government for a park, says it will protect it for future generations. Daniel's latest book is a bestseller. And we have more great-great-grandchildren than I can count now. You'd be so proud of all of them, Flynn, so proud of what we built together." She sat in silence for a moment, feeling the cold seep into her bones. "I miss you," she whispered. "Every single day I miss you. But I'm not sorry for anything, not a single moment. If I had to do it all again, make all the same choices, I would. 1,000 times over I would choose you. I would wander through that snow knowing you'd be waiting at the end, because you were worth it, Flynn. Every hardship, every struggle, every moment of pain, it was all worth it for the life we had together." She stood slowly, her joints protesting, and placed her hand on the marker. "I'll see you again someday," she said. "And when I do, I hope you still think I'm home." Willa Langford Edwards lived for another 7 years, remaining in the cabin Flynn had built, tending their land, loving their family, and keeping their story alive. She told anyone who would listen about the cowboy who'd found her in the snow, who'd said she was home when she had nowhere else to go, who'd given her a life beyond anything she could have imagined. She died peacefully in her sleep on a spring morning in 1936, at the age of 79, in the bed she'd shared with Flynn for 35 years. They found her with a smile on her face, her hands folded over a worn photograph of Flynn, looking young and strong and full of life. They buried her next to Flynn in the meadow, under the pines they'd both loved. The funeral was enormous, attended by 4 generations of family and countless others whose lives had been touched by the love story of Flynn and Willa Edwards. On the marker they placed above her grave next to Flynn's, they carved the words that had started everything: "You're home." And she was, finally, completely, eternally home, reunited with the man who'd saved her life and given her a love that transcended time, distance, and even death itself. Their story became legend in those mountains, passed down through generations, a reminder that love could bloom in the most unlikely circumstances, that home wasn't a place but a person, and that sometimes the greatest adventures began with getting lost in a snowstorm and being found by exactly the right person at exactly the right time. The cabin Flynn built still stands today, preserved by the family, maintained as a testament to 2 people who found each other against all odds and built something that lasted not just their lifetimes, but echoed through the ages. Visitors come from all over to see where it happened, to stand in the meadow where a frozen woman was carried home by a mountain man with kind eyes and a lonely heart. And if you listen carefully on winter nights when the snow falls soft and steady, some say you can still hear Flynn's voice on the wind, speaking those words that changed everything. "You're home," because some love stories are too powerful to be contained by mortal life. Some love stories become part of the landscape itself, woven into the mountains and the snow and the very air, a reminder that true love, real love, the kind of love that transforms and transcends, never really ends. It just changes form, becomes legend, becomes inspiration for all who come after. Flynn and Willa Edwards found each other in a blizzard in 1879 and built a love that warmed them through 50 years of joy and hardship, triumph and loss. They raised a family, built a business, created a legacy that continues to this day. But more than that, they proved that sometimes the best things in life come when you least expect them. That home is wherever your heart finds peace, and that love, Real love is always worth the risk. Their story ended, as all stories must, with death and parting. But it also never ended, living on in the hearts of their descendants, in the legends told around mountain fires, in the hope of every person who's ever felt lost and alone and desperate for someone to find them and say those magic words, "You're home." And perhaps that's the real gift Flynn and Willa Edwards left to the world. Not just their family, not just their business, not just their land, but the reminder that we all have the capacity to be someone's home, someone's salvation, someone's great love story. We all have the power to find someone wandering through the snow of life and offer them shelter, warmth, and the promise of belonging. That's what Flynn did for Willa on that frozen day in 1879. That's what Willa did for Flynn when she chose to stay, to love him, to build a life in his mountain sanctuary. They saved each other, completing each other in ways neither had known they needed. And in doing so, they created something beautiful and lasting and true. The mountains still stand, eternal and unchanging. The snow still falls each winter, blanketing the meadow where two graves rest side by side. And somewhere in the wind and the pines and the whisper of seasons turning, the love story of Flynn and Willa Edwards continues, a testament to the enduring power of love, the importance of home, and the magic that can happen when one lost soul finds another and recognizes, against all logic and reason, that they've finally found where they belong.